Welcome to Business Leaders Coach, where we educate, enable, equip, and empower you to become the best leader that you can be. My name is Toya Shimbi, founder of Business Leaders Coach. And at Business Leaders Coach, we work with CEOs and their leadership teams, companies that are scaling up and want to accelerate their learning. On this podcast, I bring you practical steps that you can apply in your leadership today. We draw wisdom from some of the best business books, bring on guests and entrepreneurs and authors as well. You can go to businessleaderscoach.com/podcast, subscribe so that we can send each episode and any templates or tools that come with these subsequent episodes. Welcome to episode 50. This is part 4 in a 5-part series on how to fail forward. And if you are joining for the first time, you can go to businessleaderscoach.com to listen to previous episodes. I am so excited that we have reached episode 50, which is a milestone on the podcast. Today, we continue in our series of failing forward. And so far, we've looked at 3 areas. We've talked about the importance of how do we see failure. We've talked about what do I still need to learn when I'm going through failure. And also last episode was all about have I done everything I could rather than blaming others. Now this time it's important also that we acknowledge that when we go through failure, it's not easy. It's quite emotional and there's a tendency for us to be down on ourselves. We know that when we fail, it can be devastating. It does hit us emotionally, and there does need to be a process of healing when certain things don't work out, especially when the failure has to do with people, a breaking down of a relationship, an error that was caused by ourselves that we know fully well that we could have done better, or even someone else that they did that led to something tragic happening. These are difficult things that do take time for us to heal. And at the same time, in as much as this is hard to hear, if you're going through something like this right now, what we are going through can still help us become an inspiration to others, even though we might not see it right now. But it all depends on some of the choices that we make. One of the best examples is Abraham Lincoln. He has a story that some of you perhaps might be familiar with. At age 23, he bought a general store and he decided to become an entrepreneur, but unfortunately he became bankrupt, and to some extent that might be to our benefit because we would not have known who Abraham Lincoln is and the role that he plays in history. But there was a lot more tragedy in his life. He lost his first love. She died in 1835 due to typhoid fever. He suffered a nervous breakdown. In fact, the research and history shows that he suffered from depressive tendencies throughout his life. He ran for the US Senate and lost twice. He ran for the House of Representatives and lost twice. Finally, he got elected in 1846, but then his failures actually deepened his resolve. In 1842, he remarried. He married Mary Todd, and together they had 4 sons, Robert, Edward, Willie, and Tad. But unfortunately, during those times, that era was not kind to children. Edward died when he was 3. Willie died at the age of 11. Tad died at the age of 18. I mean, it's just kind of like a sad story. However, he becomes president in 1860. Even at that time, though, when he became president, less than 40%. He received less than 40% of the popular vote. And it was a challenging time. However, despite all of Lincoln's shortcomings, all of his failures, so many people have been inspired by him. In fact, he's the subject of more than 18,000 books and counting. He definitely stands out as somebody who has had to forgive himself and forgive others, obviously, in order to move forward. So what can we learn from Lincoln's life? Well, number one, as I've said, first of all, we have to acknowledge the pain that we go through when we go through failure. There is a pain. You do need to acknowledge it, but not allow it to define who you are. And in some situations, we need to share how we're feeling with others. We need to have people around us that can empathize with us and can help us understand that we are not alone. I think that's important. And these are now failures in different areas, as I've said, relationship, death, and all these type of areas where we would see them as failures, even though they might not necessarily be. They might not be things that we are in control of, but it still sort of falls into this category. And in many cases, we also need to grieve if we need to. Grieving loss. If anything, if we have put effort into anything and it doesn't work out the way we want, then it's important for us to grieve the loss of that. And that's an important phase that also we need to go through. So forgiving ourselves, others, and moving forward. The mindset shift is actually to prepare up front and making this a statement that when we are going through some of these challenges, we want to then bring up this mindset, which is that I will choose to forgive myself, forgive others, and move on. What I have found is that with some of these decisions, if you haven't made them up front, then you're trying to make the decision of what to do in the moment. And sometimes that's the problem. But when you have defined how you want to respond to some of these things, you then, yes, you're still challenged, but if it's a decision that you've made because you know ultimately if you're not forgiving yourself, then there's no way you can move forward. If you're not forgiving others, again, as they say, when you can't forgive someone, it's like taking poison and expecting somebody else to die. And so forgiving others is important, even though it might be challenging and it might take some time. And then also making that decision to move on, that I am going to either attempt some of these things again. As you can see from Lincoln, he didn't hold back, and he obviously had a huge influence on history. And this is the reason why we just don't know what it is that we have been, called here to do. We've been put on this planet, but if we're not failing forward, we perhaps might not ever see what that is. I hope today that today's message on failing forward, forgiving yourself, others, and moving forward really helps us to understand that yes, we will go through rough times and it could be quite emotional, but we're making a decision to forgive, to move forward, and to become that best version of ourselves. So this is Toyo Shimbi for Business Leaders Coach. I hope today's message can help you throughout the week, whatever you're going through right now, just to embrace this perspective of failing forward. Speak to you soon. Thank you.